Okay, so first of all, if there was anybody that had any questions specific for Tony about what he said in his talk, then feel free to come up and ask that directly. And this is just a really informal format, right? So any questions, obviously kind of related to this environment, preferably. And you can ask any one of them, any specific one a question. You can ask a general question and hear everyone's opinion on it, whatever you feel. And let's just see how this flows. It flowed really well in Florida, and we said I should shut it down after 2 hours. So let's but we have to shut down at about 10 past or 10 to 6. So we got what, an hour and 20 minutes or something like that. So let's make the most of it. These guys are very generous to give up extra time to do this. So please take advantage of it.
Okay. Hello there. Hi. I was watching YouTube from the Fat Emperor. I get emails from the Fat Emperor, and the Fat Emperor is actually Ivor Cummings. And I didn't know that for a while, but I really appreciate the emails because, and the YouTubes that appeared on them, because it was so much good information about low carb and high good fat that and what causes heart problems. But my real question is for when I saw the one interview that he was interviewing Georgia, Dr. Aid, and he talked about the low fiber requirement, and that there was really no, I got the idea that there was no requirement for fiber in the diet, but I didn't get enough for the YouTube, or he didn't continue the questioning to know really, do we need any fiber in that in our diet to have a good diet on? That's the question for, and it's for Georgia Aid.
Okay, so thank you, Jim, and thank you, Ivor, for the interview. It was really fun. So the first thing I'll say is I have another video that's free online about exploring the risks and benefits of eating vegetables. That's a complete presentation from Ancestral Health Society 2012 that was held at Harvard. And then I also have on my website, Diagnosis Diet, I have a whole page dedicated to fiber and the fiber myth called Pulp Fiction. So, but the short answer to your question is that as far as I can tell, there's no dietary requirement for fiber in the human diet, and that it's perfectly safe and perhaps even preferable to eat a diet that does not contain any fiber. Fiber is an indigestible non-nutrient. And I think Ivor, I might want to pass the microphone to Ivor as well, because he was speaking with us last night at dinner about a study, a fiber and constipation study, and that he knows the details of it. And I think he'd be fascinated to hear the information.
Yeah, actually, I had a lovely dinner with Georgia and a couple other guys last night. So the study was, I sent it out, it was around a year or two ago, and it was very interesting. A Chinese, I believe, team had around 67 patients who had chronic bowel issues. So their average time between movements, I think, was 3 days. They all had fairly profound issues. So they were studying the matter, and they said, well, we've been told that fiber is beneficial, you know, for things like that for many decades. But we did a literature survey and went through all the published literature, and we actually couldn't find any actual evidence in the published literature that supported that, which is interesting. They then said that from our knowledge and the mechanistic reality of fiber, it'll cause, you know, fluid retention and maybe bigger stools, bulky. So we look at all the mechanisms and say fiber should actually probably be worse for bowel issues and constipation. So they took these 67 patients, they took around 50, and they asked them to remove all fiber from their diets. Now you've got to remember, these patients will be trying to eat a lot of fiber, believing it will help. So these patients took out all the fiber from their diet, and they all, 100%, saw an improvement in their symptoms in the following weeks. So it was one of the only studies I saw in humans with 100% efficacy for an intervention. The 17 or 18 controls, they let go, and they stayed at 3 days. The people who stopped all the fiber dropped down to nearly 1 day on average between movements. So there's a dramatic improvement. The team then got the people to go back to approximately half of the fiber they were eating, and they approximately half regressed back to their previous condition. So it was quite compelling, not randomized control trial, but a very good study. And I just found it interesting that that's the first time that's been tested properly in humans, to my awareness.
And I would just point out that if we do need fiber, but we need to feed it to ruminants first.
And I want to point out there's a political aspect to this, because here's the problem. We now have recommendations about consumption of fiber. And we have an industry that's been created out of that recommendation. And even if the science is now giving us different information, there's already a structure in place. There are people and industry that with vested interests in keeping it exactly the way it is. And that is part of the challenge. And this is why it requires a lot of involvement and commitment to getting involved. I mean, ultimately, we want people to be healthy. And it's just, what are the different ways to achieve that? So, but this is not just only with fiber. You'll see it as everything comes up. I'll try to point out sort of a political aspect so you can see clearly what were the challenges you're up against.
And just one caveat to what I said there. So this was specifically around bowel movement issues. There may be benefits to fiber in terms of insulin sensitivity and slower glucose absorption in the gut. There may be some benefits, but again, even those are lacking in published scientific studies, I think.
Okay, well, Ivor, thanks for qualifying, but just to say that some people do see benefits. Clinically, you have to consider feeding the gut bugs. So I don't think it's a cut and dry answer.
I have a question for the panel. Peter or Jeff, you might have an answer for this. Butyrate in butter, the butyric acid, can that feed colonic bacteria? Does that get absorbed way before that point?
I wish Steve Finney was here. That's kind of a... in a sense, that does potentially feed the bugs. I've actually heard Steve Finney talk about that. Closer, sorry.
Yeah. Don't let the shape intimidate you. Get real close.
Anyone else?
I'll just say one more thing about fiber. I misspoke a little bit. I said it was a non-nutrient. It's actually an anti-nutrient. And one of the ways, as far as I can tell from the literature, the clinical literature, the ways in which fiber appears to be minimally helpful in certain conditions is by interfering with the absorption of things that we, for example, slowing down blood glucose absorption, for example. So it's actually it's almost impossible for us to digest fiber, and bacteria will then do it for us, which for many people can sort of make you unpopular at parties, if you know what I mean.
Well, my question's a pretty good follow-up to this one, somewhat similar, but a little bit different. I've been doing a lot of reading on the gut microbiota and gut health and the diversity of our microbiome. And I didn't know if there's any studies or any experience with what about sprouting and or fermenting grain seeds, legumes, and beans? Does that change those carbohydrates in a way that they are now more beneficial to the body, or does it make not any difference?
So I don't know about how it might change the carbohydrate content, but I do know that it can reduce the anti-nutrients in the seed foods, the phytic acid, the lectins, and so forth, to a certain extent. And boiling, sprouting, soaking, fermenting, all of those things we have to do to try to make these things partially edible. But I don't know about the carbohydrate content. I don't know if it changes that. Does anybody else know?
Well, not particularly on that. I've seen some stuff that's got reasonable, I don't know, logic behind it. I just say, for my own part, I kind of hedge my bets. I tend to agree with Finney. I mean, above ground, leafy vegetables, you know, non-starchy, they may help with the gut microbiome, you know, they may slow glucose absorption. They do bring in some nutrients and perhaps not so many anti-nutrients, certain ones, maybe. So I just hedge my bets. I'm not sure if there's a major swing in health and longevity either way, to be quite honest. If you're eating meat, fish, eggs, and, you know, high nutrient density ancestral foods, I'm not sure how much they're going to swing your life. But yeah.
Thank you.
There he is. Great, thank you. So my background's in public health and public health education, and one of the things I want to ask you about is on the guidelines, especially the evolutionary guidelines that we've all been talking about, and that is the kind of my observation that we have to keep it really simple. And so I wanted to get your reaction to this idea. The old non-evidence-based guidelines simplicity was eat low fat, avoid red meats, basically, okay? And maybe, I mean, you could probably add eat whole grains or something like that, maybe 3 things, okay? And when you know, go to the grocery store and you see somebody buying stuff or you look at the labels, it's all around, you know, eat low fats, don't eat red meat, and eat whole grains. And if you ask anybody on the street, that's kind of, if you ask them, what should you eat, like David Letterman or whoever asks, what should you eat? Those are kind of the 3 things that people say. So my question is, should we not be doing the same thing with the new guidelines? And basically the messages are restrict carbohydrates, eat real unprocessed food, don't fear fats, and avoid vegetable seed oils. 4 things. Because that, you know, when I boil all this down, all the different nuances that you all talk about, it seems to me to boil down to those 4 things. And don't we need to get that kind of simplicity in order for this to work with the 300 million people of the United States and the 6 billion people in the world?
No, I agree with you to an extent that we have to develop messages, obviously, for people to apply and understand the recommendations that are being made. I think, you know, that's one of the objectives that we laid out, the 11 goals, is to come up with, we do not want to fall down the same rabbit hole that the low fat fell down. One diet approach does not apply to everyone. What we need is a variety of dietary approaches that address different issues, stages of life, and, you know, people should be able to have access to that, and health professionals should be able to freely recommend that, and science should be focused on doing the hard science to confirm that. I don't know if we're going to get it quite as simple as you've laid it out, but I think we're going to do that because obviously we know that that has not worked. And so we even have to do better in terms of education. You know, we need to be educating our people about health and understanding what it means and what it means to be metabolically healthy.
You're asking for too much too soon. And Ivor, we were talking to Gary Taubes and Sarah Halberg yesterday about targeting 2000.
Get it closer.
Oh, do you want to hold this for me? Sorry, that's better. Yeah, so we want to target the 2020 guidelines. And do you remember a little bit of the conversation, Ivor, the things that Sarah was mentioning?
Yeah, so Sarah and Nina and the guys are targeting the political system and Congress and all, and they want to go up and kind of tackle the existing guidelines and where they're not science-based and replace them with better ones. I'm not sure they really wanted a particularly simple message. They have a list of things. But that's the top tier, is to go to the political. The next tier below that, which we're looking at, we're talking to Gary about, is to get a worldwide organisation based on the UK's public health collaboration and create chapters in each country in the world and have one banner that we fight under. And that will be heavily stacked with medical professionals, only ones with really clean records, by the way. So we can't afford any weaknesses. And then the third tier under that is the public, and events like these and the public being awakened. So Sarah is focusing on going to Congress and tackling directly with the political system. I was making the point that they need the support of the second tier of a well-stocked medical professionals group affiliated across many different countries. To the original question, yeah, something relatively simple should emerge in 2020 if all these efforts are successful. If it's too complex, and I think the recent guidelines, enormous document, it's just a farce. Of course it has to be replaced with a much more basic principles-based document with simple instructions for people, guidelines. Along the lines you said, that'll all have to be negotiated, I think. But it's a great input. I think we're going to have to think about that. If there is success in getting a seat at the table to change things, what exactly are we asking to go in there? Yeah.
I guess the only other comment I would make is it seems to me that the key message has to be individualized carbohydrate restriction. It just seems to me that has to be the foundation of everything, or the rest is detail. Yeah. The rest is just kind of like irrelevant if we don't tackle that.
Well, that is crucial, and also even the AHA, who came out with that absolute junk about coconut oil a few months ago, even their reports have acknowledged that replacing saturated fat with carbohydrate leads to 7% more heart disease per 5% replaced. So even they kind of accept that. The problem is they're still stuck thinking vegetable oils are better than natural fats. But I'd agree that that's a no-brainer, with probably 60% of American adults now being carbohydrate intolerant. I think that's an argument you can make and hold and not yield on. It is absolutely a central point, yeah.
Yeah, I might just suggest that there's a model for some form of intolerance where people got together in anonymous groups and helped each other to recovery. And they were not officially sanctioned or blessed at the time they started or for a few years after. But slowly the results began to speak for themselves. Meanwhile, people were helped. And then slowly it became accepted in wider. So I think that the danger of replacing one policy with another is, of course, we're convinced we're right, of course. They were convinced they were right, too, for the most part. And the more centralized you get anything, the more easy it is to lobby, because it's just one office that you have to visit, as opposed to 50 different offices. So that can work for us. It can also work against us. So I think that the education, the personal experience, the grassroots has to be a significant part of what we try to do. I mean, if you look at the 1980 dietary guidelines, it was 5 or 6 very simple statements. And now, of course, they even included avoid eating too much sugar. So, simple statements, and then something happens. So it'll be interesting to watch, and I hope everybody does what they can to make some progress.
Just to put it in another context, like when you're saying what you were saying about carbohydrate restriction, we may want to change that message to say that how insulin sensitive are you? Am I? And that is really going to determine how much carbohydrate
That's
you
why
should
I said
be.
personalized.
Yeah, well, we obviously need to be moving that because, that's another thing that we've discovered. Not everybody's the same. Similarly, along what Ivor had suggested, that we have to change medical education so that doctors actually have some beyond a rudimentary or basic level of clinical and metabolic nutrition. And we also need to get doctors to think a little bit more like engineers. Because, again, this single chemical, this person's got a problem, well, I'll just write them a script for this, or I'll give them an injection of that, and we'll see what happens. It doesn't work like that. So we are going to be working on all of that. And I can tell you, and I can say from a strategic standpoint, it's critical we get this done in the United States, because once this happens here, the rest of the world's going to follow us. It's as simple as that. There needs to be pressure from different parts around the world, but the driver is going to be the United States of America.
Yeah, well, and really it was America that started it in the first place with Ansel Keys and all of that, and then the rest of the world followed suit, right? So I'm allowed to usurp you. I got the other mic. Does it fit?
I think it can work.
Okay.
So my question is about vegetables and minerals and vitamins, and because I eat a zero carb diet most days, and the biggest fight I get is about, oh my God, you don't eat vegetables, you're unhealthy, you're going to die. And what I would love to hear from everybody would be just if you ate no vegetables, what you think would happen to you, if anything.
Well, just on the zero carb thing, I'm aware of something that there's going to be a zero carb kind of a clinical trial of sorts, N equals many, by Dr. Sean Baker, who is, he's incredible. As an orthopedic surgeon, he's in the best shape of his life, breaking world records, and he's a zero carber, and he's always tweeting out photos of, what ribeye or whatever he's eating. So, and that proves the point that what works for you, doesn't necessarily work for others, but if it works for you and others, you should be able to. At the end of the day, I want you to be healthy. I want you to be insulin sensitive. I want you to be at the right weight, and I want you to have a great lipid profile. And I'd rather have you spend money on high quality foods, and I'd rather have you put your money in something like life insurance than spending on a lifetime of drugs, which may never resolve the problem in the first place.
Sean Baker, yeah. He's very active on Twitter. So my opinion, based on my personal experience and what I've read in the scientific literature, is that most people would experience optimum health if they removed all plant foods from their diet. And the reason I say that, one of the reasons I say that, is because plants are inferior sources of micronutrients compared to animal foods, and not only are they in most cases an inferior source, they also interfere with the absorption of many nutrients that we require, and so it's just much harder for us to obtain bioavailable nutrients from plant foods compared to animal foods. But that doesn't mean that I think everybody needs to go to that extreme. I think if most people who are insulin sensitive went to simply a whole foods diet, whole foods pre-agricultural diet, that would be fantastic. And if people who are insulin resistant went to a low carbohydrate whole foods pre-agricultural diet, that would be good enough for most people. You'd be healthier than 99% of the population.
Just personally, I enjoy vegetables and salads, and I eat them with a lot of natural fat.
Oh, you guys are something else. Well, Steve, if you ever heard Steve Finney's talk about the researcher who went up to the Arctic Circle and spent, Stefansson, thank you. And he spent, I think, at least 18 months or 2 years among the First Nations people there. and they weren't eating any vegetables, and they were perfectly healthy, living in a very hostile environment and being very physically active. But they ate the whole animal. So they would eat the organs, they would make broth, and they got everything they needed from it. And then when he went back to New York and reported on his findings, people didn't believe him. The medical community didn't believe him, thought he was lying, he had to have scurvy and all these other problems. So he was confined to Bellevue Hospital in a metabolic ward where they fed him only what he said he ate when he was in the Arctic Circle. And after, I think it was a year, maybe a little longer, they found out he was perfectly healthy and had no nutritional deficiencies. So we don't actually have to, provided we do everything else correctly. And a lot of us do it simply because we like it. And I'll personally say that I love vegetables a lot more now than I ever did as a kid, and I never thought that you'd ever get me to eat that stuff. But so it's also personal preference.
I sort of agree with what Jeff said. It's like it's a convenient way to get a lot more fat into your body is to use some of these vegetables. But also in working with people with cancer, I believe there are some values in some of the foods like cruciferous vegetables. So and I think they also have a value in autoimmune disease as well. But I wouldn't extend that kind of thinking to just plants in general.
Yeah, I kind of answered this a few minutes ago, but yeah, some cruciferous vegetables, the more nutrient-dense ones, they don't seem to be a problem for me. It's hedging my bets, if you like. Yeah. But not a whole lot, to be quite honest. It's usually meat, fish, eggs, cheese for me is the dominant source of calories. The vegetables, a relatively small amount of calories on the side. And of course, covered with butter and that, they can be appetizing. I don't seem to have a reaction. If I eat a lot of vegetables, sometimes I think there's a certain amount of gas created. So I keep back from that threshold, and I'm okay.
Okay, I think it seems like people can be perfectly healthy eating a zero-carb diet. But, I've been active in this community for more than a decade, and in my experience, extremely few people can do it for more than a limited amount of time. At least that's my experience. It's like you count them almost on one hand. Personally, I eat more vegetables now than before I started a low-carb diet, so I like it.
Good.
Well, my question's on a totally different subject. I'm interested in knowing what your thoughts are on using fasting to help with the ketogenic diet, to help with the insulin resistance. I know in my personal experience, I was very, very insulin resistant, and I started with the ketogenic diet, but it just wasn't enough to really break those too high blood sugars. And as soon as I started with the intermittent fasting, that helped. And then just to take it to the next level, I tried fasting for a few days, trying some of the things that Dr. Jason Fung suggested, and it was like magic for me. It really made a huge difference. The insulin resistance was gone, and it's just been amazing. So I would just like to know what everybody's thoughts are on adding fasting into the whole protocol or the regimen with the ketogenic diet.
You can go. Save you a break. Yeah, so I like to think of it as skipping meals, and that it should occur naturally. So over time, as you become more metabolically healthy, your appetite's controlled, and you just naturally skip a meal. And then people ask questions, well, can I have something during the time that I'm not eating? Well, you can keep yourself hydrated, you can have broth. I think it's a conceptual thing that you're skipping a meal where you're eating a majority of calories versus you want to have some fat or you want to have some nuts. It's kind of, you're making a commitment to skipping meals, and you're skipping those big meals, and I think it's great, and we have found clinically that it helps with patients that have hit a plateau. And you go one day and you say, well, okay, I'm not going to eat breakfast, and I may have a little bit of coffee, put some MCT oil in it, and I feel fine. And then lunch comes around and you say, well, I really do feel hungry, so I think I'm going to eat something. Or, I feel okay, so maybe I'll have some tea. These are things that I do. We don't really encourage extended fasts with our patients, but the idea of eating once a day, we think is actually optimal. And personally, it's taken me a while to get there, but now it almost seems natural. I have a tendency to just, I'll eat during the work week. I'll eat after I finish work, and that seems to take care of it. And then on the weekend, I'm usually sitting around looking at the fridge, so I eat.
I'd like to say something about, I think that what you did was the absolute right way to do it. You did it in steps. You started with ketogenic, so you were ketogenic, then you found that that makes intermittent fasting a lot easier, and then that makes the more extended fast easier. I don't like it when people start like I'm gonna fast because I've got cancer. I'm gonna fast because I've heard this is a really good thing, and they tend to feel pretty lousy if they're coming straight off of a standard diet. The way you did it was great, and I applaud you for that.
I gotta say, as a patient like you, I do it every week. I first got keto adapted, and then I try to always do a cycle of about 44 hours total. A little bit more than a day, but not extended. And that definitely helped resolve dawn phenomenon in terms of the blood sugars. The other thing that is critically important is you got to get in that exercise. You got to, so for me, when I get home from work, going out for a walk for an hour in the evening, the most wonderful thing, that adds to it and will increase your fat burning capacity and also your adaptation. But for anybody who's type 2, fasting will help get you increase your insulin sensitization. You just have to be patient with yourself, because you were for many years on that path, and it's not going to correct itself over a short period of time. It's going to take probably years to undo some of that damage, and there may be damage that you may never. I may have to, for the rest of my life, always include a cycle of intermittent fasting to keep myself, in remission. So that's part of the factor. But that's great that you're doing it. And to people look at me, they go, "How can you do it?" I go, "Well, once you start burning fat, it's like," they go, "What are you doing? How do you?" I go, "My body, my liver," I go, "is using the energy that's been stored to keep things functioning, and I'm totally fine." And when I pull blood glucose in the 60s, they go, "Why aren't you? You should be hypoglycemic." I go, "No, I'm running on ketones." So anyway, but great. It's probably one of the most. It's a critically important component to recovery from type 2 diabetes.
So I completely identify with your difficulty getting into ketosis and getting your blood sugars down in the morning. And so a couple things. One is I've read Dr. Fung's book, and I love the way he describes hormonal metabolism in that book. I think it's brilliant. For me, fasting is more difficult than ketogenic diet, but I had to really troubleshoot my ketogenic diet to get those blood sugars down in the morning, down into the 70s and 80s instead of up in the 90s, 100. And a couple of tricks that helped me with that was eliminating dairy, which for some reason for me is worsens my metabolism, makes me hungrier. Limiting my protein to just what I I need, and it took a while for me to figure out what that was, and exercise, as Antonio was saying. So, but different strokes for different folks. Fasting, ketogenic, anything that lowers your insulin levels and gets those blood sugars normal in the morning is good.
I'm just going to add that I think fasting is great. Perfect combination with the ketogenic diet makes it so easy to add some fasting. And personally, I I love that it saves time, and it's just you can spend some more time working. That's awesome.
And making your people work really hard too. But yeah, I just said the same as Andreas. I love fasting. I consider it like what you might call a power tool in the world of health. So I very commonly do a 20 or 24 hour. I love it. I love the slightly hollow feeling, and the edginess it gives me. And I know that's subjective and it's not scientific, but it's a very remarkable feeling, and I tell people, if I've got an afternoon meetings that are going to be really forceful and aggressive, I will purposefully not eat all day up to those meetings. And believe me, yeah, I go in there and the other guys have had their lunch and they come in and they are slower. It's an edge, and that alone, or when even speaking at a big event, I will fast right through up to that speaking, just to have an edge and to feel better, sharper. And physically, I think it's a wonderful thing as well to resolve metabolic issues. So you go low carb, or maybe you push it to keto to resolve issues. But if you add fasting, you're just adding another level of power. And I think it's well recognized. Jason Fung's book is superb, that fasting is nearly all benefits and really very few downsides, unless you do extended periods without getting minerals or bone broth and replacing things you need. So I love it.
I just wanted to take a moment just to say thank you so much for the work that you do, and to express my gratitude for how freely and generously you share it out with the world. You're helping us take our life back. And I want to say thank you to all the crew here, because I know what you're going to do with a lot of these videos. And also to Pam and Doug for putting this wonderful convention together. That's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So my question is around exercise. Being a low carber, having used the keto diet, having used fasting, intermittent fasting. My question is more, because I'm a ultra marathoner. My question is more around the upper limits of exercise. As much as I try to be healthy with all that has been shared this weekend, is there an upper limit for the exercise part? Knowing the oxidative stress that it creates, knowing that on a keto diet we have a tendency to do better with that, would the upper limits of the exercise part be higher on a keto diet? I've seen Dr. Finney talk about sports performance and ultra marathoning and all of that, but my worry on the other health spectrum is, can we do too much? So.
There's a lot there, and it all depends. So you're an endurance athlete, and being from Colorado, we do have a lot of active people. And we experiment around with ketogenic diets for endurance, and we find that some people do great. Some people do great on a high-carb diet for endurance sports. Whether that's beneficial long-term has yet to be determined with those individuals, but we can test the waters. There's a lot of athletes. I think Mark Gazelle is a great example where, he's a distance marathon runner for years, and inside he was on fire and was diabetic. So you have to watch people for those tendencies. So lately the recommendation is that 90% of it is diet, maybe 10%, 80% is diet, 10 to 20% is exercise. So if you enjoy your endurance sport, go for it. But I think there is too much exercise that is something we have to consider. And then we're not talking about really resistive sports or explosive exercise, and we get a variable response to a low-carb and a ketogenic diet. I think that some individuals lose explosive power and they go on a ketogenic diet. So we compare that to the old school athlete that wants to, bench 315 pounds, whatever it is. And, we'd say, well, these guys, when we go to the gym, we see them have a lot of sugar, caffeine, and a smoke. And they achieve. I don't think that's healthy.
So without getting into the technical, I think that one of the things that's a little concerning to me in a number of the tribes that I get to visit is there's more to health than nutrition. There's more to health than exercise. And I certainly have seen in myself that it's possible to take anything to excess. And if I find that that starts to impact my personal relationships or things like that. So, I mean, and what is the joke? I mean, I wouldn't want to be controversial here, but if a vegan takes up CrossFit, which do they mention first? You get the idea. Thank you.
I think...
I'll just give you my experience when I started running and had to figure out what was a safe level for me to run, especially to build up a base of running for 6 months before I started training for a marathon. And so I started out running 5 times a week and built up, and I was doing fine. And so I decided, well, gee, I think I'll run 6 days a week. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, I was sore. I had to really push myself to go out. I started getting signs of overtraining. And for me, I needed to do 5 days a week. 6 was too much for me. What I also learned is I started to get my mileage up and was running the same miles every week, although I would do different lengths of runs within that week. So I wasn't doing always 6-mile runs or something like that. But what I found out was that what worked best for me, especially as I added in a lot of long runs to prepare for the marathon, every 4th week I would cut my mileage down by about 6 or 7 miles for that week. I was less sore. I felt like going out and running again. I could run faster. So I think we each have to find the level where we find it's too much, either too frequent, too much mileage, and you scale back to give your body the recovery time, and that's going to be very individual. I mean, I was a plodding marathon runner. I was not ever fast. I was never going to be. But so someone who perhaps is a born runner, it'd be very different. But it wasn't that way for me. So I had to find out just what worked for me so I wouldn't get hurt, I wouldn't get overtrained, and then get too fatigued and quit. And so I managed to run for about 14 years until I did get injured. But it's a very individual thing, I think.
Yeah, well, this isn't really my thing. But I think Peter Defty and Finney and, Volok and all these guys is where the real expertise is, My experience, I don't really do running much. I have friends in work and colleagues who do marathon running who were very interested in all the stuff I'm putting out. I pointed them to the right places. They went on high-fat diets. They found, even though they were quite slim, they lost another several pounds. And the dramatic thing they all found was the recovery. They could run the following day, whereas previously they couldn't. So universally, they had all benefits, especially in recovery. And from that movie, I think Run and Fat, you also had lower inflammatory markers. It seems to be overwhelmingly for endurance And the science agrees too at the molecular level, you will be safer doing a lot of running and a lot of endurance on a high-fat diet, ketogenic. But I think you were asking, even with that benefit, is there an upper limit to how much you should be running? And that I do not know. But I guess Mark Cucuzella would be a really good person to approach, and Finian Volek and those, they're at the real leading edge.
Yeah, and just to chip in there as well, I think what Jackie was saying is actually the secret, is that your body, everybody's going to be different. And the minute you find that you're actually not improving and you're breaking down, I mean, that point of overtraining is different for everyone. But no matter what diet you're on, no matter what lifestyle you're following, there's going to be a limit, and you need to find that and stay within it.
Thank you. I found my limit this semester when I took a kickboxing class, and at 67, I think I need to kick back because I have bone on bone. But the question is primarily to Miriam and maybe some of you others. It has to do with women and aging, and you were talking about the window of eating, because I have read Jason's book also and saw him here last year, and I was very impressed with the benefits of that. But as a woman in my 60s, there are other mitigating factors, and I'm wondering if you can speak to those more, because I find in the keto world in general, it's more, from my experience, endurance, men and athleticism, and I'd like to hear more about women and aging and other issues that would put women at our age in a better state of health.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. Oh. Thanks for the question. I'm 64, so I feel for you. And I do have some pretty strong feelings about what people should be doing. They're not really backed by science, because unfortunately, there isn't a whole lot of science in this, and even less when it comes to older adults, and even less when it comes to older women. So I really want to see a lot more research that is directed at women's physiology. We're different. We don't need to compete with men. I don't think women do as well with a real short intermittent, like the women that I've worked with, and granted they have cancer, when they go to that 4 hours, I can't think of a single one that's doing well when they were at 4 hours. But you expand it by a couple, 6 hours, 8 hours, they do great. And everything seems to click a lot better for them. And so I know that's like you're swimming against the tide to say this, but I think with each decade, it becomes more challenging to do that kind of fasting. So the woman that was up here, several decades younger, and doing it the way that she did it, I think, like I said, I think that was great. But if you don't feel good doing it, then you find another, you just tweak it a little bit, tweak it a little bit, tweak it a little bit until you're feeling good, till you hit that stride. And I occasionally do a longer fast, but I do it, like you said, I do it sort of, I couldn't eat yesterday. I wouldn't have been able to eat before my presentation yesterday. It just doesn't happen. I didn't eat till like 2:30 in the afternoon. So, and I had no problems doing that, but it's not something that I would want to do routinely. So if you don't feel good doing it, you widen that window. I think it's really important as we get older to have that longer period between dinner and bedtime. I stress this with people, that the standard that you hear is 3 hours. I think for people our age, 4 hours is a lot better, and I think that's true for men too, that 4 hours is a lot better before bedtime. But yeah, you just got to listen to your body. Jeff Volek said it great. He said, when you're dialed in, so it's like everything that I think of now. It's like when you're dialed in and you're listening to, you're doing it right for yourself. Then you listen to that about the intermittent fasting. But boy, women struggle with that. Older women struggle with that short eating window, and I don't think we should have to work that hard to try to have to try to mirror what the men are doing.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Chickens.
Like I said, I'm swimming against the tide here.
Hi, everyone. Oh, knocked it. Hi, I'm a family physician, and I'd like to talk about probiotics. Ansel Keys took observational data and made strong dietary recommendations based on it. We all know the disaster that led to. I'm sorry. And now, obviously, the gut biome controls us hormonally. It affects our immune system. It does so many things, and we know how powerful it is. But people are making very strong recommendations on what's a good bacteria, what's not a good bacteria, and to my knowledge, there are no randomized controlled trials in human beings where they've given them a certain bacteria and it's taken hold and it's made a positive therapeutic difference. They're just guessing, and it's all observational stuff where they're collecting stools from people who are healthy, who don't have diabetes, who don't have heart disease, and say, oh, they've got this bacteria, that must be the good bacteria. Now, I'm a zero carber. I don't eat anything but meat products. I haven't had any plant proteins in plant fiber in 850 days. I'm healthy. I have regular bowel movements, and I think I'm doing just fine. And there was a study by the Italians where they went to Tanzania and studied the stool of the Hadza, and all this list of good bacteria that they had, they didn't find them in the Hadza. So are any of you aware of any? Now there's a rat study where they sterilized the rat gut and then inoculated them with 8 bacteria, and then the bad bacteria took over when they were fed fiber, or not fed fiber, and they're saying but rats are vegetarians. How does that apply to humans? Okay, so are you aware of any randomized controlled trials on human beings to support your assertions about what's a good bacteria and what's a bad bacteria in the gut biome? Any of you?
I would just add a short comment that I agree that this whole microbiome thing is very, very hyped right now on the basis of, to my knowledge at least, very weak and ambiguous evidence. So
they may be right.
They could be right, but I'm highly skeptical, and I think a lot of people are going to be disappointed, and we're not going to talk as much about it in 20 years, I don't think. No. But I could be wrong.
There are over 10,000 possible bacteria in all kinds of combinations. How can you say what's the best combination now?
Yeah, I generally concur. There's green shoots of potential great importance in the microbiome, but in the end, even if there is an importance of the makeup, I think you're going to be fixing it by eating the right foods anyway, which are going to give you all kinds of other benefits. I've glanced through some of the studies. I'm almost sitting back and sticking with metabolic science and letting people keep working through the microbiome for a year or two, and if they have something compelling to show me, I'll take a look.
Yeah, I think at least in the psychiatric literature, the study of the microbiome is in its infancy. We know almost nothing, and yet there are people marketing probiotics for depression and all sorts of things. So at this conference that I was just at, the International Society for Nutritional Psychiatry Research last week, there were a number of prominent microbiome researchers, and one of them, very intelligent and thoughtful and insightful, came right out and said, A, we do not have any idea how the microbiome communicates with the brain, and B, there is no proof that taking a probiotic is going to help with depression or any other mental health issue. So I agree that we have almost no information. I'm much more interested in the underlying reasons why the microbiome becomes disturbed, or why our gut is unhappy, than what we can take to fix it. It's sort of that psychology of subtraction coming up again. We'd much rather add something, take a pill, than change our diet to feed our bodies, and then our bacteria will come into line if we take care of our whole selves.
I think it's worthy of applying, research dollars to look into. It's certainly worthy of investigation. And again, it's a great question. We really don't have a good understanding, and it's worthwhile to find out. Yeah.
Hello, Carol Freeman, Seattle, Washington. I'm a certified nutritionist, and I have 2 degrees in nutrition, and from arguably probably the best whole food science-based school in the world, I think, Bastyr University. But still, this keto journey that I've been on and with my clients has literally turned, everything that I learned, even at the best school, on its head. And, from thinking that fiber is essential and we need that, but the one I find myself thinking a lot now on is the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fats. And I'm curious your thoughts on, is there a benefit necessary to worry about that as long as you're avoiding seed oils and you're eating real whole foods? Is there any benefit to supplementing with omega-3 oils beyond what you get from the anti-inflammatory effects of the ketogenic diet by itself?
Well, I think you got to get the DHA, the EPA, and the way to get that is through fatty fish supplementation. You can't count on the conversion to happen to the degree that you need if you're using plant-based omega-3s. So, but as far as the balance goes, I think it's like if you look at a dashboard dial, it just gives you an idea of where you stand, and then you can, you look at that in terms of what paleo people would have, what we evolved, to as far as the ratio was, and I think it's just more of a concern about getting too high on the omega-6s more than getting, tons of omega-3s.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, I have a few studies from 2013 and 14, and it appears to be the first time that the ratio was properly tested in an animal model, which is kind of shocking 50 years after being told to eat, these omega-6 vegetable oils, the first time it was tested. And they got mice and they actually put forward a very good hypothesis. They said we were around 1% omega-6 and we were balanced with omega-3 early in the century, and we had low disease rates, and now people are around 8 or 9%, and that's the recommendation. So let's feed mice both versions. And with a high-fat diet, they saw the 8% omega-6 had fatty liver and very significantly increased obesity. And then they did the same experiment with a medium-fat diet, and the same thing happened. And then they tried a low-fat diet, and the same thing happened. So over a few years, this team, for the first time in history, has actually tested, and it appears to be a very clear result. A high percentage of polys is obesogenic, and it's a problem. But I don't think it's been properly experimented by any other team ever. All I can find are associational studies, but they would also generally support that a ratio of 1-to-1 or 2-to-1, and keep your polys low. I think Jeff Volek says they are signaling molecules, they are not fuel. Eating polyunsaturates ideally should be for cellular structure and signaling, and our basic needs are down at the points of percent for each. But we're being told to eat huge percentages as fuel, and it's inappropriate. And there's a lot of science around how that can lead to inflammatory problems and free radicals. And I'd go with the safe option of sticking with the ancestral numbers myself.
So for someone like me who has, history of coronary heart disease, I make sure that I get at least 1 or 2 tins of sardines from North Atlantic in olive oil, as well as I supplement. I take omega-3s every day. In Europe, it's standard practice. A heart patient will be put on omega-3 supplements. So I try to get 3 grams of highly concentrated EPA DHA, not the common stuff there. You've got to shop around, like a Life Extension, Nordic Naturals, Aviva. These are the ones that have highly concentrated, and preferably in the triglyceride form, which is more stable, and will have the, will give you the benefits. So.
Oh, just the last amusing one. I got a study recently, and it was actually titled, "Soy oil is more obesogenic and diabetogenic than even coconut oil and fructose combined." And that's what they found. Yeah, very interesting. And again, it's only in recent years anyone's actually even testing this in animal models. So the guidelines just told us a lot of stuff based on just associational BS, really.
Just a quick comment about omega-3s and brain health, because again, at this conference I was just at, I was privileged to hear Professor Michael Crawford speak, who's 87 years old now and who was one of the original proponents of people eating more fish for brain health. He told the World Health Organization in the 70s, he warned them of the coming global mental health crisis because we weren't eating the right kinds of fats to feed our brains. And he was absolutely right. But I do wonder, how much omega-3 we actually would need if we weren't eating so much omega-6. I think that that's an unanswered question, and all of these recommendations are in the context of a very unhealthy Western diet. So, lowering that omega-6 from the unnatural fats. I mean, there's omega-6 in every, it's widespread in the food supply, plants and animals. But just lowering the omega-6 and getting rid of the unnatural fats, I think, probably bring us a long way to the finish line. And the other thing just to mention about DHA, which as Miriam was saying is so critically important, what I learned at this conference, what I didn't realize from Professor Crawford, is that the DHA in particular is required to create the actual synapses, the connections between brain cells as your brain is expanding, especially in fetal life and infancy. And so it's really critically important for women of childbearing age before pregnancy, as Jackie Eberstein was talking about, at least 6 months, probably much longer before pregnancy, to be DHA replete, so that when they're feeding their children the DHA that they need to grow their brains.
I had someone ask me about how DHA would get into the brain, because why would it pass the blood-brain barrier because it was so long? And I thought that was an interesting question, and I looked it up, and let's see if I can remember. It was some type of special chaperone that brings it into the brain, allows it into the brain. But that's how critical it is that there was like a specific, at least one specific, and maybe, I mean, it's not something they've researched a lot, but there was at least one specific, maybe more than that, chaperone for DHA into the brain.
Hello. Just a little bit of context. I have a history of diabetes and Alzheimer's and cancer in my family, and if that's not the worst of it, I also gained 40 pounds my freshman year of college. And eating this way, I lost all of the weight and I feel much better, and naturally I want to tell everybody. But in a university setting, in the event I tell people that I am not eating cereal products or carbs in general, am I too far away? I'm sorry. In the event I tell people I'm eating this way, let alone if I mention intermittent fasting, they ask if I'm okay. Yeah. So I was wondering, since you guys have been talking to people about this for much longer than I have, do you have any advice, especially talking to people of my age, how to get this message across?
So as a college psychiatrist, I applaud you for eating a low-carb, high-fat diet on a college campus. Can't believe they haven't thrown you out yet. It is challenging to do, but as you're living proof that it actually can be done. I think by your example alone, I'm hoping that they're seeing the tremendous improvements in your health and wondering how in the world you did it. I hope that they're curious, and I hope that they can have open enough minds to listen to your story. And I think that's the thing, is just being respectful, being thoughtful, sharing your story without trying to convert people, without trying to preach, and just maybe asking them. Sometimes I ask my peers who are very well educated, some of them are physicians and who think that my diet is really insane. Sometimes it helps for me to say to them, well, what is the science behind the diet you're eating? Why is it that you believe, just very nicely, why is the diet that you're eating? Why do you believe that the diet that you're eating is healthy? Because I can cite about 3,000 scientific articles explaining why the diet I'm eating healthy, but that doesn't mean I'm right. I just stay curious and keep the conversation going. I think that diets are really it's a third rail. This is broken. I don't know. Okay. So it's like it's worse than religion or politics. And on college campuses, there's a huge movement towards plant-based diets, primarily for compassionate reasons, not necessarily for health reasons. And whenever I've tried to convince any of my vegan students to change their diets, I've had actually 0 success rate. And that's primarily because it's not about health for them. And I think we all get to make our own choice. We have to choose our own battles, So, but I think staying respectful, staying open, staying positive role model, it takes time. But in a few years, I bet a few of your friends will look back and they might even come to you and say, how did you do that again? So I just persist.
You say that your friends say, are you okay? Is it because they have a fear that you're anorexic? And yeah, okay. I get that a lot. And I know we're like a few decades apart here. But what I say is just take me out to lunch and you'll see that, there's really no anorexia going on here. I'm perfectly capable of eating.
Hi there. Even though the last 5 years I've spent in outpatient clinical practice, I was in inpatient medicine for 10 years, roughly before that. So I wanted your opinions on using nutritional ketosis in hospitalized patients, because as I figure it, pretty much any situation that lands a person in the hospital, either electively or traumatically, is going to be inflammatory, ischemic, acidic, hypoxic, or any variation of those things. So is there any danger or specific diagnoses that would discourage us from encouraging our hospitalists, surgeons, intensivists, and hospital-employed dietitians from using nutritional ketosis?
Okay. It's not going to happen in a hospital setting because until the guidelines are changed.
There's a political component here.
Yeah, you can't do it. It's not going to happen. So what I say to people who have been, their family member's been hospitalized, is just bring some food in. The hospital's not going to object as long as you're eating. They're not going to object to what it is you're eating. It's just just let them bring the tray. Don't get confrontational or excited about it. Let them bring the tray, but you eat what's brought to you. And there's like a short list of things that are appropriate to bring and store at the hospital. But I've never had a problem with anybody doing that. And I've dealt with a lot of people who have been hospitalized. But if they can't, then I just tell them, ask for ungodly amounts of butter, have your family bring in extra butter, and just eat the protein part of it and just ignore the rest of it. So you don't have to eat what's on the plate. All they have to do is bring you that plate.
So you don't think there's a way to even promote a study, where they're given the opportunity to participate and they're closely monitored. They're getting lab work, they have their fluid intake and outtake.
I think you can that could be done, but this brings the point home, and I want to ask, how many people here are going to sign the petition? Raise their hand. All right, please, I'm counting on you. Word, okay. Because this is exactly the point. You cannot offer this in a hospital setting because of these guidelines. And I can tell you, when I had my heart attack, and I was in Montefiore Hospital, which is one of the finest hospitals, in the country and in New York. But the food was atrocious. I was like shocked, and they were giving me all this junk, white bread and all this, and I couldn't eat this stuff. I mean, I was like scratching my head. Why are they giving this to me? They've just put a stent in and they're still feeding me? And why aren't they giving me nuts and salmon? I was knew enough, but they're not giving me that. They're giving me terrible, terrible food.
Pancakes.
So we have to change these guidelines. But yes, it's absolutely appropriate an idea, but that is something to talk about. And the issue that you're also going to have with that is the funding for the trial. This is why you have to become a student and analyze and ask, where is the money going towards research in this area? Because again, there's no monetary incentive. There's no drug to be captured by a pharmaceutical company to exploit and develop. But meanwhile, this needs to be done, and doctors absolutely need to be able to offer that if it's appropriate.
Right, and the bigger issue is, shouldn't the patient have the opportunity to say, I want this, and be able to sign on that dotted line and say, you know, I understand the guidelines, but...
I can't think of a medical condition where a patient in the hospital can't switch to a whole foods diet. I think Rob Wolf touched upon this, but also I have to bring up Dr. Mark Cucuzella, who is a hospitalist in West Virginia. And he's an exception. So it turns out, I believe, that the CEO or the CFO of the hospital is a low-carb proponent. And they've been actually working on bringing low-carb programs into the hospital. And Mark's been at it so long, it's absolutely wonderful that they actually have low-carb options on the menu.
Because that would be ideal, because working in primary care, if I could take the baton from this hospitalized patient, you know, what could be a better situation than that? Especially for your high-risk people.
I think another comment is that while it would be great if people could have a low-carb option in the hospital, definitely would it really be good to put them on a ketogenic diet straight in the hospital when they're there for some sort of disease process? It might not be the greatest place to start, and the follow-up might be hard. So I'm not sure that's a perfect place to start it. But if they're on a low-carb diet, of course, it would be great to have the option.
Thank you.
I think I can do it. I have more of a meta-analysis comment for discussion than a direct question. I'm relatively new to the community, like maybe 7 months in, and I want to thank Miriam for being so great about pointing out when she's directly talking about women and directly addressing where we don't differentiate between the experience of men and women in studies and in a lot of the things that are happening in this community. And in cycling, which is what I do for a hobby, women often say women are not small men. And we don't want to rely on the science and the N=1 experiments that men do to say how an experience is to be predicted for a woman. And as a community that I know is already coming from behind the 8 ball and trying to reinvent the way that we do things, I hate to think that we're also coming down the path of doing a bunch of studies that are predominantly men or not differentiating when we have done them on men so that women have the information to say, okay, how much is this really relatable or where can I really look at that? I'm not saying that there aren't common experiences at all, and I think Doug's done an amazing job of having representation of both men and women on the panel, and you guys have done such a fantastic job of representing a wide array of experiences, but women are not small men, and N seems to equal men in this, and also just in an audience where like the majority of the participants were women in this group, and we see online and in the community like all of this N=1 stuff being done by men. And ladies, you're so smart, and I've talked to so many women who are doing their own N=1, but you don't see women publishing their N=1 stuff that would be so valuable. So I'm just wondering if you guys have thoughts or...
Thank you. Yeah, just from a metabolic standpoint, we actually see women that that are metabolically neutral inside, and they have a lot of healthy subcutaneous fat, and the approach to them is quite different.
Well, and I mean, in my own N=1 experiment, right? Like, because I'll go out and start researching, you know, ketone changes and everything like this, and when all you're seeing is what men say that can make you feel like, wow, I'm doing this wrong or I'm screwing this up. And then, you know, 2 months in, I factored in like, oh my God, I need to factor in a 28-day cycle of hormonal fluctuation. And then when I was able to plug that in, a lot of things were able to fall in, but I haven't, you can't find that. And even when, you know, you guys are giving slides and studies, I think what would even be helpful when you're breaking down the population to say, okay, and this population was 25 men and 13 women or something like that, just so that we have just the reference.
One of the remarkable things, at least to my mind, is in the disciplines that I was brought up in, we can create really tightly, well, we have a great deal more control over what we can do to our test subjects than you can do in human research. And I can get incredibly uniform plant populations genetically, or I could get, it's a little more harder, but I can get fairly uniform animal models to work on. And so sometimes I wonder how close we're getting to the point where we're expecting answers from science that science can never give us. And so then, it gets back to individualization. Are we finding something meaningful that individuals can be looking for in whatever way works in their situation, which again speaks to the absurdity of one-size-fits-all dietary recommendations that were based on primarily men and white men from North America. And now we're making essentially worldwide dietary recommendations. It's absolutely absurd, but that's where we are.
Just two speculative comments. First of all, thank you for your great question. One is that from an evolutionary standpoint, it really wouldn't make sense for women to need a different diet than men do. You don't see that typically in animals. But all those rules can be thrown out the window when it comes to the modern diet, because women, because of our hormonal cycles, because we're designed to become pregnant, we are much more sensitive to the hormonal milieu. We are much more sensitive. We have to be, because if we become pregnant, we have to be listening and responding to the hormones and signals being sent through the placenta from the baby, et cetera. So I think we're just at much higher risk. We're different for that reason. But from a fundamental evolutionary point of view, the healthy diet that should work for a truly healthy diet should work both for men and for women. But you see what I'm saying, okay? Yeah, that's the only thing I can think of to say that might be helpful.
Also want to say from the political standpoint, we also want to make sure that women are adequately and represented at the table, that these decisions, input aren't just coming from men or one particular sector. As I've argued and said that in this healthcare debate, one of the reasons why the healthcare failed was because women were not brought to the table at the bargaining table and negotiations on that. So women have to be factored into the equation.
Okay, just that we've got about 10 minutes, so try and get through, give everyone a chance.
I feel this question actually isn't asked enough at these conferences, but I'd love it if I could get a short answer from each of you real quick. What is, now that you each personally have your own wealth of experience, not only being in this field, but also advising and seeing other people and mentoring them through it, what from each of you would you say is the most common novice mistake that you see for those people entering this diet?
I just want to say something to you, Dave, to acknowledge you. You are an incredibly brilliant man.
Thank you.
And I want anybody watching here who is or knows a MacArthur Fellow, Dave Feldman is worthy of a MacArthur grant for what he's been able to uncover and discover, and his work absolutely should be funded. And I hope anybody watching and listening pays attention to your work.
Thank
really.
you so much.
I really appreciate it. Brilliant, brilliant.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to say eating too much.
I'm going to say do your homework. Learn what you need to learn to be successful. All the little nuts and bolts, not just the bigger picture, so that you increase your chances of being successful.
I'd probably have a different answer 10 minutes from now, but in my world, in the cancer world, the thing that comes to mind is the stress of the diagnosis and the impact, the failure to recognize the impact that stress has. So that's a kind of a novice mistake, I guess, and that's something I really work with people. It's like bring down your stress level and you'll see your glucose level go down too. So it's not really about the diet. They get the nuts and bolts of the diet because there's so much information out there. They might be eating too much protein. They might, not read a label and find some carb in there that's throwing them off a little bit. But really, I see in my world it's about stress.
Right. Okay. I would say to have a reasonable understanding of the underlying mechanisms, because I found when I switched to the diet, having a basic grasp of how it worked well, obviously I'm more than a basic grasp, but for people in general, they say to me, oh, I don't want to know any of the science, just tell me what to eat. And if you just tell someone what to eat, it's the old thing about, give a person a fish instead of a fishing rod, and they'll fail eventually because they won't have any navigatory potential to, when they get into a little trouble, to navigate back, because they don't have any understanding. They'll just slowly fall off the wagon and drift. Whereas when you actually have a basic understanding of how it works, when you put X in your mouth, you have a basic understanding of what it'll do. It'll go into your duodenum, your ileum, it'll trigger, hormones, and just a sense for what happens with these foods. It makes it a lot easier not to eat the bad stuff. Just understanding. So I think ideally people need a basic grasp of how it works and not just be told what to eat, I reckon.
So the biggest mistake for people who start a low-carb ketogenic diet, so Dr. Evelyn Borderoy, she wrote a post on our site a couple of weeks ago, and she said, the title of the post was, "As a doctor, I want you to eat more fat and more salt." And I think the biggest mistake is to not follow that advice.
Thanks, guys. Fantastic job.
So my personal experience is that my wife became interested and started looking into this 2002. And she was smart enough to know that talking to me about it before I was ready to listen to her talk to me about it wasn't a winning strategy. And so but her approach was, this is what I'm going to eat. What would you like to eat? So, and then in 2007, when I finally became aware of what prediabetes was and IB1, then that, then there was overcome the resistance. So in the set, one of the mistakes, what is it? There's nothing worse than a reformed smoker. Right, so we get really excited and we want to share this with everybody, and of course it's going to save the world. And there's nothing wrong with that, except that people are going to get tired. So if every man's an island, then our job is to paddle around until we find the right beach to land on. And if we model it and people see that we're not dropping over dead from eating all that butter for a week, right, which is whatever the absurd notion is, if they see us, it's remarkable the people that lose a bunch of weight and people come up, are you okay? Right? I mean, like they think you have some bad disease because you've managed to lose 40 pounds because nobody can. And ultimately people then might start asking and be more open. And so I would, the secret of enlightenment is to lighten up. And we should maybe take that a bit to heart as we interact with the people around us, to be more effective when those times come.
And again, from a patient, personal perspective, I'd just say be patient with yourself, be open, and everything takes time. It's not you'll probably see in the course of doing this some pretty dramatic things, but it's a journey, and the journey never ends until they bury you. Let it be a journey of discovery about yourself, about food, about your relations with other people and the community. That's what it's really about.
I love that word, discovery. So working with young women on college campuses, two things. Perfectionism, they're trying to be too perfect about it right up front, and that they're really setting themselves up for failure. And the other is a female aversion culturally to meat and fat.
Hi, my question is about what you can comment on the protein consumption, not so much whether to eat animal protein, but the amount, the mechanisms which drive mTOR, and how that compares with how we would traditionally have feast and famine, because the amount of protein in a feast and famine time would have been perhaps a mechanism to drive mTOR. And if you've seen any negative effects in your patients or as patients, because I've done an N1 as well, where I dropped my protein, but my lean body mass remained the same. So.
Can you tell us how low you went on protein?
Well, as I was adapting in ketosis for about 4 years, I had between 60 to 80 grams of protein per day, and then I dropped it in the last year to probably about 40 to 50, so not much, but the only difference is it differed. Some days, 3 days a week, I might have had no animal protein, and then I would have it on the second or third day. And so when I came back and I did my DEXA, I was shocked. I retained my lean body mass. My fat percent dropped, which is interesting.
So the simple answer, because there's a lot there, is I think protein intake depends on the age, the sex, the activity. All those things have to be considered. But with our patients, we usually focus on starting with a gram per kilo or a half a pound per. I'm sorry. Yeah, a gram per kilo. That could be approximately 80 grams per day, plus or minus. And all the things about, longevity, mTOR, there's a lot there.
Yeah, mTOR. mTOR is kind of getting hyped lately, and it's true that protein directly activates the mTOR complex, but then kind of everything activates it. So the fact that there is a unique activation via protein directly, I think it's maybe getting a little exaggerated. If you take the nominal guidelines for protein of 0.4 to 0.6 grams per pound, I think that's spot on for people with moderate exercise, higher for higher exercise levels. Protein Power by Dr. Michael Eads back in '96 went through tables of what should be taken, and I think they're exactly right today. And mTOR hasn't changed, not that I'm aware of. The other thing is there were reports looking at IGF-1 and saying protein, can be as bad as smoking cigarettes and animal protein. That was a big one a couple of years ago. I analysed that and I'd have serious questions about it. And IGF-1 was pumped as being massively important, and it is. But many papers refer to the insulin IGF-1 axis, and they can't separate them, and they cross-react with each other's receptors. So I was quite disappointed to see a paper that selectively picked IGF-1, did not actually look at all at insulin and measure it, and I found that a massive gap in a paper that got hyped all over the world. So I just think there's a little bit of excitability about this, and I'd hate to think people are tuning their protein up and down based on mTOR. I would see it as getting quite navel-gazing, is my opinion. That's personally, I think.
Okay, can we? I'd rather just try and get these last two through. We're going to have to shut it down. I told you, we could be here for 3 hours.
This will be quick. There was a little Freudian slip. You said rat when you were talking about ruminant. Rodent, yes. And I was wondering about that. I was wondering about eating lower off the food chain, whether there's any interest in that or any possibility. It seems to me that there's a source of protein that's been running around for millennia, that paleo probably ate a lot more little rodents than they did big kills.
Well,
and I'm just curious in terms of,
yeah, so guinea pigs are a rodent, right? And they're a delicacy in the Andes region of South America. But how much lower do you want to get on the food chain than eating plants and then eating the plant eater? That's pretty low. But yeah, that was an interesting moment. I don't know what to blame that on, but I enjoyed it. Thanks.
There are foods saying that in Colombia you can get the ants that have a particular. There's a species of ants that they eat. There's a deli, they mix it with chocolate and these other. And I mean, like, and then in Southeast Asia you can eat any virtual kind of insects. I remember I was in Bangkok, Thailand, and I went to this food market, and I was blown away by what they were cooking and frying and offering. I'd never seen anything like that. So
So this is another N of 1. I'm very new to the world of low carb and came to it with a diagnosis first of Hashimoto's thyroiditis, then became hypothyroid, and then found out I was insulin resistant and moving in the direction of prediabetes. So I opted for low carb, high fat. I have not lost an ounce. I am the size that I was, but now I'm off thyroid medication and, but I guess because it's an N of 1, and I'm no longer, my A1C is 5.4. But I guess what I'm interested in is when you do go on and you read about, hypothyroid and low carb, high fat, there's a lot of mixed messaging in whether it's good for people who are hypothyroid. And I'm just wondering if you could comment on that.
I would love to comment on that because I see that, with cancer, people get the panels before they start treatment, and thyroid panel is sometimes usually ordered. And I see a disturbance in numbers, but I don't really, I tell people, hold off. If, unless you have symptoms, just wait it out a few months, get it retested, and then take a look at it. So I think there's like you said about excitement over mTOR, I think there's a lot of excitement over the thyroid hormone issue, and of course uric acid. But I don't see it play out, and it sounds like you don't either.
Yeah, I don't. And there's actually was a wonderful multiple-page document that Mike Eads did a few years ago and had it on his blog. I don't know if it's still there, but it was to address that very issue that people say how you do low carb, your T3 drops. Well, in all the patients I've seen, we had a lot of people come into us already hypothyroid, and I've been on low carb since 1974, and I have perfectly normal T3, T4, and TSH levels. And if we saw a lower level, people didn't have signs of hypothyroidism. So I just think that's a myth. And if you can, try to see. I don't know if it's still there, but Mike Eads did a great job in talking about that.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic that Mike Eads says that. I'm not sure I'm even familiar, but also Google Ron Rosedale thyroid, and he has spoken on this extensively also. And Ron and Mike are both aligned with the exact same story that account a lot for me. I wonder about iodine. I've been looking into it recently, that iodine deficiency in the soils and people's diet. I think it's acknowledged where 55% of Europeans now are getting less iodine than they should be getting, even by the current recommendations. Well, no.
Well,
in
if
Europe,
you're on a restricted salt diet, we used to get iodized salt, but then people go to the sea salt, which may or may not have the same amount of iodine in the salt, and iodide being, I think I'm right about this, a negative ion, it is going to leach out of the soil. So it's not unreasonable to expect that that's going to be depleted over time. So that was just another of those consequences of a general guideline.
So,
can I just say one? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I agree that this is likely some kind of internet myth. There could be some interference with the numbers, but within the normal ranges, and doesn't seem to be any symptoms involved. I mean, I can just say that I treated tons of patients with low carb diets for 8 years. I never saw it. I asked Dr. Eric Westman about it a couple of days ago. He's been doing this for more than a decade. He's never seen it. I mean, hypothyroidism on low carb, doing it all day, every day, basically. I asked Dr. Sarah Hallberg about it not so long ago, and she said that the only thing that she sees is that when people lose a lot of weight, they need less thyroid medications. It's like weight-related. That's it. So I think it's mostly just an internet myth.
Can I just say one other thing, being Canadian? So I hope that something like this comes to Canada, but we are also in the process, for any Canadians in the room, because we can't sign your Nutrition Coalition, they are revising Canada's food guide. And so they are looking to have input from both individuals, but also healthcare providers. And you need to have that sort of input in by August the 14th. So for anybody in the room who hasn't put anything on there, I think it would be great, similar to your Nutrition Coalition.
Many of the U.S. doctors have actually signed the petitions.
And I believe, yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, I realize that, yeah.
In Canada as well, if you follow Carol Lofferman and isn't it Barbara Roberts, are very much engaged in that whole thing. So,
I mean, this is going to get started, and it's going to be going on a global basis. There's an undercurrent going on in Australia, New Zealand, around the globe. And we're going to also be doing this in Latin America. And so everybody is going. The key is to stay informed and be engaged.
Okay, thanks. We're done. Okay, so please, before everyone stands up, I just want to get Pam up here, Dora, Jess. Sarah had to go, so she can't be here, but I couldn't have done it without them. And quite honestly, Dora and Jess volunteered so that they could be here and be a part of it, and I don't think they saw any of it because they were outside working all the time, and I don't know. We'll get to give you the videos or something, but yeah, thank you again. And then again to the speakers to give up their extra time for this. I told you that this was going to be a good session, right? Okay. Thank you. It's been a huge honor to be able to bring all of these people to you, and I really hope you got a lot out of it and that we'll see you at the next one. Thank you.